wife's sister's husband passed away in Eretz Yisrael. So that's why he hasn't been around.
Wife's sister's
Husband.
brother-in-law.
His brother-in-law passed away, yeah. So that's why he hasn't been attending. So I think we got up to, if I'm not mistaken, we got up to Utlasakroy. So today we're actually going to have a nice chazara because we had so many different psukim that could have been confusing what's referring to Maisa, what's referring to Truma. We had a pasuk that says, once you toivel your tahar, and the Gemara attributed that to Meiser. We had another pasuk that says, Uva Shemesh v'tahar, which means you need Harav Shemesh, that the Gemara attributed to Truma. And then the pasuk by Yoledes, which says V'chiper alav akayin v'tehera, V'chiper alav akayin v'tehera, which means you need a carbon brought in order to be tahar. That the Gemara attributed to Kachim. So Dr. Gemara Utlasa. Oh, 1 second, Mr. First wants to know where we're on. So let me just respond to Mr. First. It's 7, 6, 1, 3. So the Gemara says there are 3 psukim. Maybe I'll bet he says, well, I'll just give it a minute till Mr. First signs in because he was looking for the right channel. So the Gemara says that there's 3 psukim that the Gemara attributed to Truma. And Rashi tells us the 3 psukim that we're talking about. So I'm on the 3rd line on the top of the Amud. Utlasa kroi b'Truma. It says Bekachim lo yoichal adash yitar. So one pasuk says that one may not eat kachim until they're tahar. Ukimna la'il minei b'Truma. And we already learned earlier that pasuk, even though it says Bekachim, it's referring to Truma, because it says Ish Mizera Aaron, and we learned it's referring to something that all of the Zera Aaron could eat, both men and women, so it's referring to Truma. That's the first pasuk. The second pasuk that it says by Truma is Uva Shemish v'Taher. Uva Shemish v'Taher, which says you need Harav Shemesh. And the third pasuk was by Yoledes. It says Ad Meloi Shemei Tahira, and from there we learned on Friday that Ad Meloi Shemei Tahira, even a Yoledes who has a chiyuv to bring karbonis as the final stage of her Tahira process, even her can eat truma as soon as it's Meloi Shemei Tahira, even before she actually brings the carbon. Which means we have 3 psukim that are talking about truma, and we already explained on Daf Ayin Daled what's the purpose of each pasuk. But the Gemara is kind enough to give us a very nice, concise chazara of what all these psukim are for. So Zok the Gemara Utlasa Kroi b'Truma Lamali. Why do we need 3 psukim that each address truma? Why do we need 3 psukim that each address truma? What is the purpose of each pasuk? So the Gemara really makes it clear for us. Trichi, the ime arasha yitar. If we only had a pasuk that says a kohen may not eat truma until he makes himself tahar, loy havi yadana b'mai. We wouldn't have known exactly what does a person need to do to make himself tahar to allow him to eat truma. So therefore, kozav rechmanu uva shemesh v'tahar. That's why the pasuk says, you know what I mean? That the kohen has to be tahar before you can eat truma. I mean uva shemesh. I mean you have to wait till sundown after the day that he toiveled. Because of Rachman uva shemesh, and if we only knew uva shemesh, then I would have only known hanimili delav bar kapara. The pasuk that says uva shemesh v'tahar, we learned is speaking about tumais that don't require carbon. For instance, tumas mace or a zov haraya shtei reiyos, who's tame but doesn't need to bring a carbon. Or a Mitzorah Muskar, a Mitzorah that was just under observation. Again, he doesn't have to bring a carbon. So if it only said Uva Shemesh V'Tar, I would have thought that what type of Tumah is the Torah referring to when the Torah says you only need Hava Shemesh, that's if the Tumah was the Tumah La Bakapora. Abel the Bakapora, but what if this person was healing from Tsaras? What if he was become Torah from Ziva 3 times? He needs to bring a carbon there. Maybe Adamaisi Kapora. Maybe for such a person, Havos Hashemesh is not enough. He wouldn't even be able to eat Truma until he actually brought his carbon. For that, Kozer Rachman Ad Melois. By the Parsha of Yoledes, and we know a Yoledes does have to bring a carbon. Nevertheless, even though a Yoledes has to bring a carbon, the Torah says Ad Melois. It's enough just to wait until the end of the time period, and even before you bring the carbon, you can eat, which we said on Friday is referring to Truma. So that tells us all the distinct possibilities. Whether or not the person is a Tomei that requires a carbon or not, regardless, once the end of the day comes, after the day of the Tefillah, that person may now resume eating Truma. Because of Rachman Ad Melois, and if we only had the pasuk in the Parsha of Yoledes that says that a Yoledes, once she waits the time after she goes to the mikvah, she can eat Truma, Havamina Fila B'loy Tefillah. I would have thought that who said you need tefillah? It said Ad Meloy Shemei Tahira. I stuck in mistakenly tefillah, but it doesn't say that in the pasuk. It just said Ad Meloy Shemei Tahira. How do I know you need tefillah? Therefore, because of Rachmana Ad Asher Yitar. That's why the other pasuk says Ad Asher Yitar. It's not just going to come naturally that the tumah is going to dissipate. An action has to be taken, and that is tefillah. So that's a beautiful little chazorah of what we learned in the past block. So we know that for eating truma, you need tahira. We know that the tahira that you need is tefillah and avah shemesh, and we know that that works even if after all this the tameh still needs to bring a carbon. That carbon is only needed to allow the tameh to eat kachim, but to eat truma, one can eat truma as soon as nightfall arrives, the day of his tefillah. Beautiful. Zok Gemara, if you remember yesterday, when we were discussing the pasuk, how did we know that the pasuk that says lo yochal ad asher yitar, it says bekachim hu bekachim lo yochal, the kohen shouldn't eat kachim ad asher yitar until he becomes tahor. Now we didn't know what the word kachim is. So the Tana told us that when it says kachim, it doesn't mean karbonis kachim. It means truma. Why? Because it says ish mizera harin, which means it's referring to something that all of the zera harin, all people from Aharon's descendants can eat, and women can't eat kachim. So it must be referring to truma. How do we know that it's referring to? How do we know that Ad Asher Yitar means only Havah Shemesh and not bringing a carbon? And that's because the tumas that we're discussing in this pasuk are tumas that don't need a carbon. And what did the Gemara tell us? When it says Zov in the pasuk as one of the people who may not eat truma, it's referring to a Zov Bal Shtei Re'iyos. So a Zov who wouldn't have to bring a carbon. When it says Sarua in that pasuk as somebody who's not allowed to eat truma, it's speaking about a tzarua muskar, not muchlat, so therefore he doesn't need karbonos. But there's someone who argues on that. Ulahak Tana de Polagale, the Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel learned that the parish that pasuk is speaking about truma, and it's speaking about a person who was Tomei who didn't need karbonos. But there's someone who argues on the Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, and he has a different explanation to the pasuk. And the way he explains the pasuk is as follows. He said, "B'zav bal gimel re'iyos u'v'mitzareh muchler akosat medaber." The pasuk is talking about a zav who needs to bring a carbon, a mitzareh who needs to bring a carbon, which means the process of their tahira is going to involve a carbon at the end. The high ad asher yitar. So now, when the pasuk says one may not eat kachim until they become tar, completely tar, it means adamaisi kapara. Well, because they say that, then obviously this pasuk cannot be talking about truma, because we already said that truma one can eat even before they bring the carbon. So if you're going to learn this pasuk is talking about people who need a carbon and they have to wait till after the carbon, it must be that this pasuk is referring to kachim, and this pasuk is telling you that if one becomes tamei, and the type of tumah that someone needs a carbon, then one would not be able to eat kachim until he brought that carbon. That's what this pasuk would be telling you. But if you remember on Friday, we had another pasuk that told us the same thing. Because Baya Yerledis, who is a woman who needs to bring a carbon for a kapara, the pasuk says, "V'chipra aleh kain v'tehera." She's only completely tar after the kain brings the carbon. So now we have two psukim that are virtually telling us the same thing. One pasuk is telling us that a zavu needs a carbon, or a mitzvah needs a carbon, cannot eat kachim until he brings a carbon. And we have another pasuk that tells us that a Yerledis, who brings a carbon, may not eat kachim until she brings the carbon. But they're virtually the same halacha. So therefore, trei kroi b'kachim lovely. Why do I need two psukim to tell me the same halacha? So if you are trichi, they're very, very relevant. Both psukim are very relevant because we wouldn't know the information in one from the other. Because of Rachmana b'Yerledis, if the Torah taught us this great chumrah that a Yerledis who requires a carbon may not eat kachim until she brings that carbon, you know why I would have said that there's the reason for that? Mishum de Meruba Tamasa. Do you know how long a Yerledis is tummy for? Do you know how long a Yerledis cannot eat from karbanos? If she had a son, it's 40 days. And if she had a daughter, it's 80 days. That's a very long tumah. She requires a carbon to once again allow her to eat kachim. Aval bezav, a zav who's only tummy for 7 days, aim aloi. Maybe that is not such a severe type of tumah because it's short, and therefore maybe a zav would be able to eat kachim even before he brought his karbanos. Because of Rachman bezav, and if the Torah only told us that a zav who needs to bring a carbon has to wait to eat kachim until the carbon is brought, that's because zav is very, very, it's a very powerful tumah. You know why? The zav, if they see dam, or if you see ziva, depending if it's a male or a female, it will be soiser and he's got to start over again. So he'll never become mutter, he'll never become tar while he's still seeing re'iyos. Avol Yerledis, a maloi. A Yerledis, sure, she's tummy for 80 days if she had a daughter, and she's tummy for 40 days if she had a son. But after the first week by a son, and after the second week by a daughter, even if she sees dam, even if she's continuing to bleed, she's still mutter to her husband. She's still mutter to her husband, because that's called dam toyar. So sure, she can't eat karbanis the whole time, but she could be with her husband. And even though she's seeing dam, it doesn't impact her. If a zav sees a riyah, that'll impact him or her right away. So in a certain way, zav is more chamer. So maybe only a zav needs to bring a carbon, and not. Maybe only a zav has to wait till he brings a carbon until he can eat kachim, and not a Yerledis. So this shaila over here is a fascinating shaila that has far-reaching impacts all over Shas. So let's just analyze what the shaila is. Is the chumrah the fact that the zav has a higher intensity tumah? Is that more powerful? Why is it a higher intensity tumah? Because any re'iyah will be soiser? Or do you look at the length of the tumah, the duration of the tumah? So even though a Yerledis, the intensity of her tumah isn't so intense, but it lasts so much longer. What is stronger? So where this comes to Nachmini, Rabbi Yosef Engel, who was a genius in New Kol Kula, he compared this to some other cases. What happens, Rachmana litzlan, if there's a person who's a chayla sheyesh b'sakana, and he needs to eat meat on Shabbos, but the problem is we don't have any kosher meat. So we have two choices. We can either be over one severe Isser or two severe Isurim of Shechita on Shabbos and Bishul on Shabbos, and then ongoing for the rest of the day, this chayla can eat meat perfectly beheter. Or we can say we have an avela here that we don't have to shech, so let the person eat the avela and he'll be over lavin all day long every time he eats from the Isser and not do the big avera. So the question is it worse to do a high intensity avera, like a chiyuv skila, like bishul and shchita on Shabbos, or is it worse to do averas over a long period of time, constantly being over lavin? That would be toilet in this shaila. I'll give you another example of where this would be relevant. Imagine a kohen and a Nazir, both are not allowed to become a Tomei Mace. They're walking down the street and they encounter a Mace Mitzvah. So we know both a Kohen Gadol can violate his kahuna to become Tomei, to bury a Mace Mitzvah. And we know that a Nazir can do the same. But the question is, if you have both here, who would be best suited? Who would be the right person to violate? On the one hand, you might say it should be the Nazir. Why? Because the Nazir's restrictions of Tumah only last for the period of his Nazirs. It's short term, versus the Kohen Gadol, who has a lifelong prohibition to become Tameh. So maybe let the Nazir be Matama to deal with the Mace Mitzvah. Or maybe Fakert. A Nazir Kedusha is more intense, because not only may a Nazir not become Tameh, a Nazir may not cut his hair, a Nazir may not drink wine, while a Kohen is allowed to. So the intensity of the Kedusha of the Nazir might be stronger. So which one do you look at? Again, that's this same Shiloh. And the third place is a very interesting.
I don't hear the connection. One is a person's doing something via dime, and he has to make a decision what to do. The others we're seeing what does Hashem consider, what does the Torah consider a bigger? There's no action being done by anybody.
But you see this comparison between intensity versus longevity. And I think that's what the Yosy angle is trying to highlight. Let me ask you another question. We discussed this Shiloh once before. You have $100,000. Are you better finding one wonderful Moshe to give that to? Or are you better off giving $100 to 1,000 people? That comes from the same Shiloh. But the interesting Shiloh is, if some of us say by Birchas Krishma, Ahav Asayla, and some people say Ahav Arab. There's different minhagim. I think Nusach Sfard primarily says Ahav Asayla, and I think Nusach Ashkenaz says Ahav Arab. There are some Hasidic Akilas that say Ahav Asayla during the week and Ahav Arab on Shabbos. So Ahav Arab means a high intensity Ahav. Ahav Asayla means it's a long term Ahav. What is better? What's more important? So that would be the same Shiloh. What's the most important? So I'll just, as an aside, I will tell you that Rabbi Lowy actually says both. He says Ahav Rava and Ahav Asayla. He says both together in Birchas Krishma. That's one thing. The other interesting Shiloh that pops
Where
out
did he
of it,
take that from? Where
I
did
don't
Rabbi
know.
Lowy?
I don't know, but what happens when someone said over today in Shir that he once heard Rabbi Lowy saying Ahav Rava. And he asked Rabbi Lowy, and Rabbi Lowy said, Avadi say Ahav Rava. So Chaim Tzvi walked right over. I'm sorry?
When I was in Oval, I went through davening with him, and how to say this, what to say with davening for them, and he told me that's what he does. That he says both.
You know what he says first?
I don't know. I don't remember.
Well,
I think the chicken.
Very good, very good. We're going to be learning about eggs soon. Okay, gewaltig. So that's the first interesting halacha. The other interesting halacha is a woman. We actually learned once about the tefillah. A woman has to toivel when she comes out of her nida cycle to be able to touch chodshim. That's not relevant to us nowadays. But a woman also has to toivel to become mutter to her husband. So the question is, the iser to her husband, does that stem from her tumah, or it's a separate thing? That's another interesting shayla. So Rabbi Yosef Engel is medayik from one word in Rashi that it's based on tumah. It's very simple, because if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, let me see if I can find Rashi inside. Rashi says right over here. Rashi says, here it is. Yerledef hutra machlala shiroya dam utahira labayla. It doesn't say she could see dam during the period of dam tahira umuteres labayla. It says utahira labayla. So you see from Rashi klor that the isser to her husband is a tumah based isser. It's not stamach isser. Gewaltig. So let's move on. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. The pasuk till now we were quoting psukim that we're discussing if a person becomes tamei, how he has to be matayir himself to touch kachim, to eat kachim, or to eat truma, etc. But we haven't discussed a keli that becomes tamei. So now the Gemara is going to analyze that. So I'm going to go to the side of the Gemara, to the margin, where the full pasuk that we're going to analyze now is quoted. It says in the pasuk, "V'chayil asher yipol alav mehem b'moisam." Any keli that a dead sheretz fell onto, yitma will become tamei. Michal kliates, whether it's a wooden keli, or a veget, or a fabric, or hide, or a sack or sackcloth. Kol kli asher yasa malacha behem. Any keli with which you do a malacha, if it becomes tamei, you have to treat it. How do you treat it? By mayim yuva, it must come into water, meaning you have to toivel it in the mikveh. And then, even after you toivel it in the mikveh, v'tamei had the arev. It will be tamei until the evening. V'tar, it'll be tar. So that's a contradiction. It's going to be tamei till the evening, and it'll be tar. Now, if v'tar means in the evening it will become tar, then it should have said v'tamei ad ha'arev v'yitar. It will be tamei until the evening, and in the evening it will become tar. But that's not what the pasuk says. The pasuk says v'tamei ad ha'arev, it'll be tamei until the evening. V'tar, it'll be tar ad ha'arev. If it's tar, it can't be tamei. If it's tamei, it can't be tar. And that is the paradox, or the seeming contradiction that the Gemara is going to analyze. So let's see back in the Gemara. V'mayim yuva v'tamei ad ha'arev. Lovely. What is this teaching you? We already know that you need harav shemesh to be able to eat truma. Amar Abzeir l'negia. It's telling you a halacha that it's usher to allow something to be mitame the truma. The Tanya we learned vitame. The pasuk says vitame ad ha'arev vitar. So when it says vitame, yochal l'koil. I would think it's tame no matter what it touches. If it touches meiser, if it touches truma, tar, it's tame. Zok the Gemara, Talmud Leimer Vitar. It says it's tar. In fact, the more even tar yachalukah. Talmud Leimer Vitame. So how could something be both tame and tar at the same time? Haketzad. Zok the Gemara, kan lemeiser, kan letruma. If it's for meiser, there's no such thing as shlish l'tuma. Meiser are not so makbanam. So therefore, once the keli was toiveled, and now the keli is what we would call a tful yoim, it's allowed to touch meiser. It won't be a problem. But in order to allow the keli to touch the truma, you have to wait for harav shemesh, which is very parallel to what we said with eating, right? We said if a person becomes tamei, right when he toivels, he can start eating meiser, but he has to wait till the evening to be able to eat truma. So the Gemara is darshaning here from the pasuk that parallel halacha is also by a keli that becomes tamei, regarding whether or not it's allowed to touch truma or touch meiser. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe in order to touch meiser, you have to wait until the evening, and truma you can have it touched right away as soon as it's toiveled. So Dr. Gemara, that's not logical. Mistavra that it should be parallel, like we said a minute ago. The same way when it comes to achilas truma, we say you have to wait until the evening, but you can eat the meiser right after the tefillah. It would be logical to argue that same scenario and psak exists lagabi touching. That's one shot. There could be another makar that prohibits a keli that's tamei or a person that's tamei from touching truma. Where do you know it from? It says in the pasuk, the Tanya. I think the aleph in the Bach sticks in the word the Tanya. B'chol kodesh loisiga. This is referring to the Yoledes. The Yoledes, when she's tamei, may not touch. Loisiga means to touch. May not touch kodesh. So the Brisa tells us it's not what you think it is. Rather, it's a shara lo oiche. When it says b'chol kodesh loisiga, it doesn't mean don't touch. It means don't eat. Oy eino elo negeya. Maybe you could consider the remote possibility that the Torah actually means what the Torah says, and that's loisiga. So there's the halacha b'chol kodesh loisiga, which we're questioning what it means. But right after that, the pasuk says, "Vel hamikdash loisavo." This woman may not enter the Beis Hamikdash when she's tamei as a yoledes. Makish kodesh l'mikdash. These two halachas are going to be similar in what the einish would be if they're violated. Ma mikdash, davar sheyesh by netilas neshama. Just like the Beit HaMikdash, if a woman who's a Yeledis walks in when she's Tameh, she's chayiv kares. So this is a violation that carries the death penalty. So let's say the other halacha that's discussed in the very same pasuk is davar sheyesh by netilas neshama, is something that if you violate it, there's an iser misa, there's an iser kares. Because if you eat kachim when you're Tameh, you're chayiv kares. But if it's merely a question of touching, so if the chalkayis lasiga means literally touching and not eating, netilas neshama leka, there's a lav, but there's no chiyav misa. So therefore, it's logical to say that the pasuk is speaking about achila, even though it says lasiga, because it's something that would carry a chiyav misa. So frank the Gemara, so why didn't the Torah just say the chalkayis lasaycha? Why did it express achila using the word negia? Because as an aside, the Torah wants to tell us that it's also to touch kachim, truma, when one is tamei. So we have two versions of how we know that something that's tamei, you must prevent it from touching truma. You either know it from the Chol Kodesh Leisiga, since the Torah expressed the Isra Achila with the word Leisiga, the Torah is telling you as an aside, there's also an Isra to touch, but that does not come with a Chiyav Misa, or it's from the Tamei Ada'are, the Taher, which tells us that there's Tamei Ada'erev for Truma, meaning the Tamei Keli you shouldn't allow it to touch Truma until the evening, until it becomes Tahar. Beautiful. That's the end of this sugya. We're going to have one more, a little bit of a Lamdash sugya, and then we're going to get into some very X-rated Gemaras. So let's see what we have over here. Zok the Halil Gemara. We learned a little while back, we had a Mishnah, and the Mishnah discussed the following case. A Kohen made Kedushin on a Grusha. He's not allowed to be married to a Grusha. But he didn't make Bia yet. So we know until the Kohen is boil the Grusha, she's not yet a Halal. He made Kedushin. But this Kedushin is a Mishtameret will be a Psula. Meaning, why does someone do Kedushin? Because he wants to eventually make the Nezuin. So this woman is on track to have a Bia Psula because she's a Gerusha and she's going to have a Bia with a Kohen. But she didn't have it yet. She's only on a Rus. So there's a Machlokes in the Mishnah. Reb Meir held, Mishtameres Lebi Psula, she may not eat Truma. So this woman may not eat Truma because she's a Mishtameres Lebi Psula. What happens if her husband who made Erison upon her died or gave her a get? Then if she's a Bas Kohen, she continued eating Truma. She didn't become a Chalala because even though she was in a scenario of Mishtameres Lebi Psula, the Bia didn't actually happen. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon argued on Rabbi Meir in that Mishnah. And Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon said, an Arusa, even though it's an illegal Erison, because she wasn't allowed to accept Kedushin, she's a Gerusha, she couldn't have accepted it from a Kohen. So she's a Mishtameret will be a Psula. Nevertheless, she does not become Nifsal from eating Truma. So there's a Machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon if Mishtameret will be a Psula is possible. So we have that very case over here. Because our Mishnah shared with us a case. There was a Kohen who was married to his wife, and they were living happily ever after. And the Kohen, Nachman al-Tzlan, got into a terrible accident, and he became a P'tudaka. So now he's not allowed to do Bia with his wife anymore. So the Mishnah says, if he didn't do Bia yet on his wife was able to eat Truma up until now, because he was a regular, healthy person, she can continue to eat Truma even though he's not allowed to do a Bia anymore. But if she's married to him, that would be considered Mishtameres L'Bia Psula. A woman who's married to a husband is Mishtameres L'Bia. That's what couples do. So Zok to Gemara, Man Tana Mishtameres L'Bia Psula, Deraisa Achla. Who holds that a woman who's a Mishtameres L'Bia Psula can eat Truma? Who holds like that? Amar Rabbi Elazar, b'machlokes shnuya. This was the machlokes that we learned in the Mishnah letter ago, and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, and it's Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon who argued on Rabbi Meir, who held that this Arusa is allowed to eat truma, even though she's a Mr. She'll be absurd. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afilu Tem Rabbi Meir, even Rabbi Meir, who over there said that the Arusa may not eat truma, here where she was already married to her husband and she was already eating truma, and now the question is, should you stop her from eating truma? Even Rabbi Meir would agree that you don't stop her from eating truma. Shiny hacha shekvar ochla. She was already eating truma due to the fact that she was married to a kohen. Rabbi Elazar. So what about Rabbi Elazar? Rabbi Elazar said the machlokes shnuya. Rabbi Elazar said that this Mishnah is inconsistent with Rabbi Meir. Shekvar ochla lo yamrina. It's like a prospectus. Past performance is no indication of future performance. Up until now, yes, she was able to eat on behalf of the fact that she was married to her husband, the kohen, but that has no impact on her schus today to continue eating truma. So therefore, it shouldn't make any difference at all, and therefore Rabbi Meir would agree in our Mishnah that she may not eat truma. And I'll prove it to you. I'll prove it to you that the fact that she had been eating until now shouldn't have an impact. The Eloite Mahachi, Bas Yisrael Shanisas LaKohen. A Bas Yisrael who marries a kohen, so while she's married to the kohen, she's allowed to eat truma. She lost her husband. So we know the halacha is, unless she has a child with this kohen, she may no longer eat truma. But Zokt, Rabbi Elazar, why not? If you consider the fact that she was eating until now as having any type of value, toichal, shekvar achla. Let this woman continue eating truma because she was able to eat already, because she was able to eat when her husband was alive. Elamai, you don't say that. So then why would you say over here that the fact that she was eating until her husband became sick, until he became a psudaka, why would you say that would help her eat further? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi said, no, there's a very big difference. When her husband dies or divorces her, so the Kenyan kedushin that gave her the schos to eat truma is no longer there. Of course, there she couldn't continue eating. But here the same thing, the same item, the kedushin that allowed her to eat truma up until now is still here. There's a technical difficulty because her husband became a psudaka. But the schos that gave her the right to eat truma is still here, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan holds even Rabbi Meir would agree in our Mishnah that she would be able to continue to eat truma. Okay, the rest of this daf is quite graphic, not for children. Ezu psudaka. What is exactly physically what occurred with the psudaka? Tanu Rabbanan. Ezu psudaka kol shenivtzu beitzim shaloi. His beitzim were wounded. Rashi's potza makas cher v'sakin. It was wounded. It was damaged. It was smashed. Va'afilu achas men. Even if only one of the beitzim was damaged, he's a psudak. He's also to marry a Bas Yisrael. Va'afilu nikfu. Even if one of his beitzim is still there, but it was punctured, so it wasn't smashed. It was just punctured, a pinhole. Va'afilu nemukoi. Or even if they got hit and because of that they shriveled up. That would also render the person of psudaka, would prohibit him from marrying a Bas Yisrael. Va'afilu chosro, even if a small piece was missing, a small tiny bit of one of the beitzim got cut off, that's also enough to make somebody into a psudaka. Amar Rabbi Shmuel b'nei Shor Bircham and Bracha, Shemati mipi chachamim beKerem b'Yavne. I heard from the chachamim in the great yeshiva of Kerem b'Yavne that kol she'ein loy ela beitza achas. If someone who only has one beitza is a einay ela shris chama. That is the definition of a shris chama. Frankly, the kosher, and therefore a shris chama is not prohibited from marrying a Jewish girl. Frankly, what do you mean? Shris chama so kedaitach? The definition of a shris chama is someone who either was born with this condition or because of naturally occurring situations this happened. You're talking about something that there was a physical damage done. That's not a shris chama. That's not the definition of a shris chama. Ella, you're right. It's not the definition. It's harehu shris chama. We're just saying it halachically. It has the same halacha as shris chama is kosher. Just like a shris chama is kosher, so too this type of person is kosher. So interesting to note. We just learned a moment ago that Edab to Daka, close to Beitim, Shloiba Filu Achatman. So if even one of his Beitim are damaged, he's up to Daka. Now we're learning that if somebody has one Beya, it's going to be good. So there's a shaila in the Rishonim how to learn this. There are certain Rishonim who learn that there's actually a machlokes. There's a machlokes if having one Beita is enough or not. There's other shittas who learn that this is referring to somebody who was born with only one Beita. That person's not a shris. That's like a shrischa. But someone who was born.
Doctor?
Sorry?
Why don't you ask a doctor?
I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to get to that. It's a very good arc because that's brought up. It's brought up. And the other shita is that even if it was taken out, that it was taken out and nothing else was damaged, that would also not be a problem. So why don't we ask the doctor if such a person can have children or not? So first of all, I saw an interesting comment in the Mesivta Gemara, I believe from the Chazon Ish. At first, the Chazon Ish says that we should discuss with a doctor, and this should be clarified by a doctor. In other words, the halacha should be clarified by a doctor. Who could have children, who can't? So Chazon Ish says it's not mistaber to say that the Gemara's psak is not definitive, and it requires consultation with a doctor to determine what the isser is. So therefore, the Gemara sets it out this way. That's the way it is. But we're going to soon see that there are certain people who cannot have children, yet they're still not considered a psuadaka, and vice versa. So the halachic definition of a psuadaka is not necessarily tied directly to whether or not someone can have a child. Right? We know if someone's childless, that doesn't make him have to divorce his wife. It's dafka if it's this particular condition. So let's see the Gemara weiter. We mentioned earlier that if the beya was punctured, that also renders somebody a psuadaka. So right away you see that there is a correlation between having children and a psuadaka. So I'm not 100% clear exactly what it is, because from this line it's much exactly what the Beryl said, that it's totally in giving birth. So again, I'm not 1,000% clear, because we're going to see svaros. Maybe as we go through the Amud, we'll be able to formulate our own opinion as to what the Gemara comes out. But the Gemara is asking, are you saying that would make the beya not effective? But who gavra the salakidikla? There was a person who once upon a time climbed up a decal tree that has many sharp branches, and as he was on top of the tree, you heard a noise, ouch! And he said, ouch, I just got punctured by this leaf. And he's in agony and he's in pain. So what is Allah for such a thing? V'charzer stilu bebeitzim, and Rashi nokvu koitz bebeitzim, a thorn from this tree punctured his beitzim. V'nafek minei kechotum muglo, and a stream of shichva zera, or at least what looked like shichva zera, oozed out of him. And you know what? Violent. And after that, he had children. So you see, in fact, that something like that could have children. So Gemara, I don't think so. Hashalach Shmuel l'kamei Rav. Shmuel sent to Rav about these children that were born. V'amar lei, and he said, "Say v'chazer albonav. I think you should investigate the milkman, me'ayin heim, to make sure that maybe there's no way these children are the children of this father. There's something going on here. We got a problem. These children might be mamzer." The Noid Yehuda asks, if in fact Shmuel held that this guy was a Krishovka or a Petzuadaka, and that's why he investigated the children, why did he wait until they had children to investigate whose children they were? Why didn't he right away paskin this man may not live with his wife because he's a Petzuadaka? Zokt the Noid Yehuda, you have a raya, chloride from this Gemara that having children is nothing to do with psuadaka. This guy, even though he lost his ability to have children, he's not a psuadaka. He's allowed to live with his wife. But if we saw that his wife had children, clearly there's a problem here. They can't be from him. So that's why I told you it's not 100% clear, because the Noid Yehuda brings a raya that even though you have an injury that renders someone not being able to have children, that doesn't necessarily make him into a psuadaka. Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Psuadaka b'dei shemayim kosher. If someone becomes a psuadaka b'dei shemayim, so it wasn't a physical accident, Rashi said, how did it happen? Two ways. Either they were mubarak through a big storm. So there are those who learn Pshat Rashi means he got hit by lightning or something. There are those who learn that he got so afraid that caused him to not being able to have children. Or he was born that way. So such a person is kosher. So once again, you see clearly that Psuadaka is not completely totally in having children. It had to have been done by man. It had to have been caused by an accident. Zog to Gemara weiter. Amar Rava, Hanyu de Karinan Patsua, Veloikrin Hapatsua. It says, Veloyave Psuadaka. It doesn't say Veloyave Hapatsua. Hapatsua means someone whose genitals aren't in good condition, even if they were born that way, even if it occurred naturally. It doesn't say that. There's Psuadaka, which seems to indicate that there was an incident that occurred, some type of accident that caused that to happen. B'masnisa Tana, we learned in the Brisa, Nemar, it says in the pasuk, Lo Yovei Psuadaka. V'nemar, and it says in the pasuk, Lo Yovei Mamzer. Mal Alam B'dei Adam. The psukim, the pasuk of Psuadaka is directly before the pasuk of Mamzer. There are two psukim, one after the other. We know by a Mamzer that didn't happen by itself. There was no immaculate conception over here. We know by a Mamzer it's B'dei Adam. Ma lahalom b'dei adam. Just like a mamzer is b'dei adam, there's a physical activity that occurs to create the mamzer. Afkan b'dei adam, so too the psuadaka is not something naturally occurring. It's something that happened due to something that people did. So that's another proof that a psuadaka that occurred naturally wouldn't be asher lo v'bekal. Amar Rava, when it says petsua, it's bechulan. All of the individual parts of a man's genitals, if they're damaged, they will make him asur. Dach, crushed, bechulan also applies to all the different components, and crushed is bechulan. And now the Gemara goes to list off the individual components of a person's nether regions. P'tua bechulan means bein sheniftzakid. So if the gid was damaged, wounded, bein sheniftu beitzim. So if his beitzim are wounded, bein sheniftu chute beitzim. Or even if the tubes that join the beitzim to his body, which are the ones that are cut by a vasectomy, those are also going to make him into a psuadaka. Dach b'kula, the same thing with dach if it's got crushed. Bein shenidach hagid, so if his gid got crushed, bein shenitchu beitzim, bein shenitchu chute beitzim. And krus, cut off, which probably is more appropriate for vasectomy, krus b'chulan, bein shenichu sagid, bein shenichu beitzim, bein shenichu chute beitzim. I apologize that I can't hold myself back from sharing a cute story. There was once a person who wasn't very educated. I'm not going to be specific because we're on YouTube. Who was getting a vasectomy. So he had an appointment in the hospital to get his vasectomy. So he came. Normally, you come to the hospital, you come in shmata clothing. You're going for surgery. He came in a beautiful suit with a tie, with cufflinks. He was dressed to the hills. So somebody asked him, "Why in the world are you dressing up for coming to surgery?" So he says, "If I'm going to be impotent, I'm going to dress impotent." Okay, Zok Ehel Gemara weiter. Zok Ehel Gemara weiter. Amar la Yahumei Rabbanan l'Rav. One of the Rabbanan asked Rabba, "Mimai dahad psuadaka b'oisem mokem." It says psuadaka. Something's crushed. It doesn't talk about what organ it is. Who said it's your reproductive organs? Maybe the Torah is saying if someone has his skull smashed, if there's damage to his head, he's not allowed to marry a Jewish woman. Maybe that's what the pasuk means. Amar lei, so Rav answered back, by the mamzer it says, Afdar Asiri lo yavel bakal. Not only can't you marry a mamzer, any progeny of the mamzer you can't marry. But when it talks about the psuadaka, it only talks about the psuadaka. You know why? Because the psuadaka couldn't reproduce. So that's how we know it's speaking about oisem mokem. Because if it was referring to someone who has a smashed head, that wouldn't prevent someone from having children. Furthermore, that's not a good raya. Maybe the reason why the Torah didn't mention future doros of a psuadaka is because they're not usher. The ilahu the usher. The person who has a smashed skull, he is the person who is not allowed to marry a Jewish girl. But Bareu Barbare, kosher. But his children and Iklach could marry. A mamzer, you're right, not only could the mamzer not marry a Jew, any progeny of the mamzer can't marry a Jew. But someone who has an injured skull, he might not be able to marry a Jew. But who said his children can? So therefore, we need another raya that is not referring to someone who has an injured head. It's referring to someone who has an injury in his genitals. Dumya de Khrushchev. We compare it to Khrushchev. It says Lo Yove Psudaka u Khrushchev. Ma Khrushchev ba'isamakim. We know Khrushchev has to be in that area. Afhainami ba'isamakim. For example, how do you know Khrushchev? U Khrushchev gufei. Mimai de ba'isamakim ema mitzvase. Maybe Khrushchev, what's oozing? Maybe his lip got cut. Maybe such a person is also love of B'kalashem. Zok Gemara, it says Shiv Choksiv b'makam sheshoyvech, from a place that oozes. So let's think about this. A mouth doesn't ooze. When someone spits, it shoots out. That's not called shivcha. Shivcha means just oozing out, and a mouth doesn't ooze. So Zok Gemara, maybe it means if someone has a damaged nose, someone took a nose job, maybe someone who had a nose job can't marry a Jewish woman. Zok Gemara, no. Miksiv b'shavach karos. Does it say in the organ that oozes, referring to his nose, karos is damaged? That's what's chaser? It doesn't say that. It says khrushchev. It says that it is damaged and that's why it's oozing. Mishal yudei krisa shoyfer. We're talking about an organ that would not be shoyfer naturally. It would shoot out with strength. But only because it's damaged does it now just dribble and ooze out. If it wasn't injured, it would shoot out well. The only organ that works that way is the aver. You can't refer to the nose, whether the nose is injured or not, the way liquids leave the nose is it oozes out. But the aver, when it works, it's mekaleach properly, and because it's a cross, that's why it's shofcha. So it's an injury that causes something to become oozing rather than shooting. The masnisa tana, we learned in the brayso. Nemer lo yave psuadaka. It says lo yave psuadaka b'chal Hashem. V'nemer lo yave mamzer, and it says a mamzer cannot call b'chal Hashem. Ma la la boisamokum. Just like a mamzer, how is a mamzer created? By activities in that area. Avkan boisamokum. So too, when we're talking about psuadaka, it's activities in that area. So that takes us to the end of this sugya. We've proven without a doubt that Psudaka, Khrushchev are referring to that area. Either we know it from Mamzer, because Mamzer is Ba'isamakim, or we know it from Khrushchev, and Khrushchev means that it's only oozing because of the damage that was done, so that can only be in that area. Gewaltig. Now the Gemara has another shot. Now the halacha is, we learned the halacha is that if the Torah is cut off, that doesn't make someone a Khrushchev. As long as there's a tiny little strip left. In other words, if the whole Torah is cut off, the person is a Khrushchev. But if he leaves even a hair of a circumference all the way around, that would still be someone who's kosher love. So the Gemara wants to know what happened, and this is extremely painful to even visualize, is someone stuck a needle into the tip, not the hole, the opening, but the side of the tip, and he pushed it down through his aver diagonally down. And where it came out the other side was already below the tip, out of the actual main shaft of his aver. So we have a hole that's going through and through, but it's being that it's on a diagonal, one side of the puncture is on his corona, and the other side of the puncture is in the actual aver itself. If the puncture was through and through on the corona, it wouldn't be a problem, because even if it was cut off, it wouldn't be a problem. But here we have one side of the hole extends up the shaft, and that's where the hole is. So that is the shaila. What's the situation with that? So Zok the Gemara, Nikav Lamata Me'atara. Now, when the Gemara used Lamata and Lamaila, and it's talking about the aver, we're talking about an aver that's not erect, which so means Lamata would be the tip, and Lamaila would be the part that's closest to the body, that connects to the body. So Nikav Lamata Me'atara, the hole, the needle went in on the Atara, Shekenegdoi l'mayla me'atar. But where it came out the other side was already above the atar in the actual body of the gid. What is the halacha? Is that called nikav to asrim because of psudaka? Tavar Reb Chia bar Abba lachshurei. Reb Chia bar Abba thought to say that this is kosher. Omer Rabasi, that's not true. Hachi Omer Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Atara kol shi makeves. If even it went with Atara, if it's even a mashu puncturing the gid, it's still going to be ma'akev. It's still considered a psudaka. The im nishtara me'atar. So the Mishnah says that if most of the atar is cut off, but there's one strip of atar left, that's good enough. Yosy Ravina, look how by it. Ravina wanted to understand precisely which part of the atar has to remain so that the person should still be kosher l'avei b'kal. Molech chutzer amru al panei kula. Does that mean it has to wrap around the entire gid, the full circumference? Or al panei ruba? What if it only goes around the right of the circumference, but it's damaged a little bit? Amalei rava to svol ravina molei achut al panei ruba. It's enough if there's just a hair piece of corona going around right of the circumference, that would still make this person Torah. But uchalape reisha, it has to be the part of the corona that's closest to the gid. So again, if we call the tip of the aver the bottom, the part of the corona that has to remain has to be the top part of the corona, the one that's closest to the gid. But what if that corona was all mangled and right at the tip of his gid, all at the tip is where there's a little strip? That won't be good. It has to be contingent territory. It's got to be connected directly to the gid. Okay, now we're going to get into some other graphic situations. It's hard to imagine this. I'm going to be using some graphic terms, but that's the only way we can understand. Imagine someone put his aver into a pencil sharpener. So now the tip of his aver comes to a point. Kshera, that would not possible him. He would still be kosher. But kamarzev, and in order, the best way for me to describe kamarzev, imagine you have a tree stump. It's 12 inches in diameter and it's 4 feet high. And you take a massive pie cutter, which cuts out slices that are a triangle, and you push it from the top of the tree trunk down to the bottom. And now you have a channel, a V-shaped channel cut from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree. So what if Rahman al-Islam, that happens to someone's aver? A pie-shaped piece was sliced right out of it from top to bottom. Psula, that would render this person a psuda. What's the difference? High shalat ba'avira. If you have this channel cut in the entire aver, well, that means there's air penetrating the entire length of the aver, which will not allow his zera to properly mature. Again, I don't understand the medical component of this because I don't even think the zera matures in the aver. It matures in a gland inside the body. But I'm not a doctor. I'm not a biologist either. But we have to understand the Gemara at face value. So if there's this channel, since it's shalat ba'avira, it's going to mess up the zera. The high low shalat ba'avira. But if it's pointed like a pencil, so there's no air getting into the channel that the zera is coming out of, and therefore the zera maintains its potency, and therefore the person is not asur. Reb Chisda said the opposite. Kamars of kshera, if it was a trench going through it, that would be kosher, but the kol was psula. Why? High guarded, but high low guarded. The marzev, Rashi says, that will allow the zera to come out. Why will the zera come out? Is because the entire circumference of his gid is in direct contact with the canal that it's in. So therefore, it's getting stimulated, and since it gets stimulated, it will lead to the zera coming out. Mashenkin, if the gid is in the shape of a point, well, at the bottom where it's wide, it will come into contact with the canal, but the rest of the height will not. So there won't be enough physical stimulation on the zaver to create a zriya, and therefore Reb Chisda holds that if it's ki kolmis, it wouldn't be good, but the kamars of it would be good. Exactly the opposite of what we saw from Abu. Amar Rava said, Kavasa de Rav Huna mistaker. It makes more sense to say like Rav Huna that Kamarzev is puzzle and Kikomas is kosher. Why? Because of the svara we said earlier, Hai lo shalat ba'avira, vai shalat ba'avira. Air is not good for zera, and since when there's this channel cut, there's air coming into contact with the zera, it's going to mess up his reproductivity options. You have the other svara of Chisda, imishum gredusa. What about the fact that the whole aver is not stimulated, only the widest part? That's not a problem, because that's enough to stimulate. Imagine in the olden days, the way they used to get wine out of a barrel is they would cut a hole in the barrel at the bottom. Let's say they would cut a 1-inch hole at the bottom of the barrel. And then they would have a spigot that they would install into it. The spigot was designed to be used for different size holes. So the spigot was the part that you inserted into the barrel. Like I'm imagining like a rubber bulb that you install into the barrel was a cone shaped. So when you put it into the hole, if it was a smaller hole, it grabbed it right away where the cone was thinner. If it was a bigger hole, you would just put the spigot in deeper till it gets wider, and then it grabs it because it's in the shape of a cone. But whatever it is, eventually, whenever it catches, and everything works. So therefore, Zokt Rava, it doesn't make a difference if only a small part of his aver is in contact with the walls. Once there's contact, it works. It's going to work anyway. Ravina told Meremer, this is what Marzutra said, Mishmei Rav Papa, in the name of Rav Papa. And he said as follows, Hilchasa, Vein Kakomas, Vein Kamarzav Kshera. They're both kosher. Mi'umi Boyalite, but he has the following question. Lamata Me'atora or Lamaila. This that we're discussing, that if there's this condition, it's kosher or not. Are we talking about that this is happening on the actual shaft of his gid, or are we talking about this occurring on the crown of his gid? Now we know the whole crown could be cut off, except for one little piece. So of course the whole shiloh here is only if it's on his gid. On this crown, that for sure wouldn't be a problem. For sure it's speaking on the shaft of the gid above the atar. If the discussion here is that it's occurring on the atar itself, even if it's completely cut off, besides one little strip, it's going to be kosher. So that what's the shaila? Why would Ravina ask Meremer such a shaila? He was just seeing how sharp his Talmud was. He asked him a question that he knew wasn't a good question. Like Rashi says, Leda, he just wanted to know, is Meremer sharp enough, clear enough in the sugya, to right away tell Ravina that doesn't make sense. There was a tragic story in Masa Machasya where someone had this injury where it was like a marzev. He had this pie-shaped trench cut out through his gid. Shafya Mar Baravashi Kakomas. How did Mar Baravashi fix this? It's just too painful to imagine. He took that gid and he put it in a pencil sharpener and he ground it down. It's like when your lead breaks off on your pencil, you just grind it down with the pencil sharpener till you have a point again. And that's what Mar Baravashi did to correct it. Now, on our bodies, the shaft that we have has one tube going through it, and either urine enters it or shechvazera enters it. But they share the same canal through the gid to come out. In the olden days, the teva was different, and there was actually two different pathways. There was the collector lanes and there was the express lanes, and they shared that shaft, and there was a divider in between them. So there were like two tubes going up someone's gid, one that carried the zera and one that carried the urine. And what happened was the Eastern groups of the shechvazera, the pipe that carried the shechvazera got plugged. How did I know? Because the apik b'makam kanan, his zera started coming out through the other tube, and I guess you were able to tell at the tip where it was coming out of. Again, the Chazon Ish says that it's nishtana teva. This is not relevant nowadays. The Chazon Ish actually says that I spoke to doctors and I asked them to clarify for me which parts of the body never change, were always the same, and which parts sometimes evolve. And in fact, this is one of the items that evolved. And it used to have a separate channel, and now we don't know that. In our bodies, it comes out of the same channel. So Sava Rabibi Barabaya Lachshure. Rabibi Barabaya thought to say that this is kosher, big deal. It's going to come out. Omar Rapapi said, Mishum Asimi Mulai, since you come from Mulai, what is Mulai? There's two pshatim in Mulai. It either means from the mashpacha of Eli HaKohen, who cannot have children. There was a kolala on the mashpacha of Eli HaKohen because his children misbehaved. So Rashi is mishpachas umlala mi beis Eli, from a mishpacha that loses their children from the children of Eli. That's one shot. So since you come from such a family, Amrisa Mili Melisa, you're saying cut off words, nourish the words. But Tosfos says V'yesh lefarishu shem makom. It was just the name of a place, so he was using the place. Just because you come from Michigan, that's why you're a Michiganer. So it was something like that. You come from Michigan, so you're a Michiganer. You come from Mulai, so you say Mulai type of comments which are not logical. Amrisa Mili Melisa. And in fact, this would be also if the zera is traveling through its proper channel, only then will it be potent. But if the zera is now going into the collector lanes and it's supposed to be in the express lanes, the zera will not be potent, and therefore this man would be usher. Okay, let's stop here. Baruch Hashem was a beautiful Gemara. We should have a wonderful week. We should
We're not learning tomorrow.
Oh, Vada, we're learning tomorrow. So we're learning, Mitchell, we're going to learn 7 a.m. and at 9 a.m. We're going to have to discuss tomorrow what we should do on Monday, because Monday is a long weekend. So I don't know if the others are going to want to learn at 6 a.m. on Monday, those who normally come to the earlier shir, or if the others are going to want to come to a 9 a.m. shir only. So I guess I'll ask the oilim tomorrow morning, come to the 7 o'clock shir, on what they would prefer for Monday. So that's still, we're for sure going to learn at 9 on Monday. The question is if we're going to learn at 6 or at 7 for the earlier share.
Okay.
Okay, good to talk, everybody. Thank you very much.
Yosy,
Go ahead.
Yes.
I have two technical points today. Nothing to do with Gemara. First of all, it seems like you have a different way of pointing. You have like a little cursor instead of your finger or a pointer.
I'm at home now. I'm not in shul. So in shul, I have a real Gemara and I have a document camera that's on the Gemara, so I can either point with my finger and you'll see it, or with the pointer. But at home, I just bring up the daf from a website, so I can't point to it with my finger because I'll touch the screen, you won't see anything. So the only option I have is the cursor, which is very hard to see.
Okay, second.
And not only is it hard for you to see, it's hard for me to see. Half the times I'm shaking my mouse just to find my cursor.
Okay, the second point, and this started on Friday. It's almost, being frank with you, I'm almost ready to turn it off. Every 30 seconds to a minute, there's a pause, and I don't hear you for about 2 seconds. And I'm missing important thoughts, like I'm not getting the connection sometimes of what you're saying. I was trying to measure on my watch if it's something exact, but it doesn't seem to be exact. It's somewhere between 30 seconds and it stopped.
It just happened now, by
seconds.
the way, as you're talking to me.
Really?
And that's the reason. The reason for that is because your internet connection is not strong enough. It's not fast enough. And it's not able to process the data. So I would recommend shut off the video.
Well, I like the video because I like looking at it, number one.
So shut off your video. You'll receive my video, but you won't have to be using bandwidth to transmit your video. So that should make it a little easier.
How do I shut off?
You on the bottom of the screen, the picture of a video camera, you just click on the video camera.
I never do have me on.
You're on now. I see your face now.
I'd like to just let you know at the end that I'm here so we can talk.
So if you normally don't have it on, that means you
Number one, I'm in the exact same place that I've been in for the last who knows how long. I've never had a problem with this with anyone, and it only started on Friday. Are you
Well,
sure no one
could
else is
be-
having the
could
problem?
be-
You're saying the problem's on my side?
Well, I can tell you in shul on Friday, there was an internet issue. So it's very possible that
It just happened right now.
it's very possible that either your internet at home or my internet at home is not fast enough. It's very possible it's my internet is not fast enough. That's one possibility.
I have a very fast internet. I can't remember, but I got it from Rogers, and I took like one of the fastest ones.
I don't have the fastest. I have an average one.
But did anyone else tell you this is a problem?
No. That doesn't necessarily mean that's not a problem. It just means no one told me.
It's aggravating because I missed the train.
It just
you
happened
missed
right
one
now.
word. Yeah?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
said it's aggravating, and then it froze. And that was aggravating. It
Okay.
must be an internet speed issue.
I'm not sure how to fix it. I'm saying it wasn't the problem. This is the very first time I ever had it on Friday.
Let's do a test. Tomorrow, if it happens, shut off the video, even though you want to see it. Shut it off. Let's see. Let's see if there's only audio going back and forth. Let's see if that will work. Because basically, the more data we have
Maybe I'll come
across
out.
the line, the more likely this is to happen.
Okay, I'll give it a try.
Let me know how it goes.
Okay.